Today's lesson is Food Poisoning, the Invisible Threat. Hello, everyone. I'm Mike.
I'm Roger.
And today it's our second look at the very interesting and important topic of food poisoning. A lot of this has been spurred by the food poisoning case here in Taipei from back in March when some people eating at a vegetarian restaurant in Taipei got sick. 30 people, in fact, got sick, and 4 of them, unfortunately and very sadly, died. They found out that the culprit, the reason for the food poisoning, was something called bongkrecic acid, which is a fairly rare type of food poisoning to occur. In fact, that was the first time we know that it has occurred here in Taiwan. Researchers and investigators were still finding out about it, so it spurred a lot of people to start thinking about food poisoning and also caused us to have this article to learn more about it because it is an important topic in order to keep yourself and other people safe.
Exactly. So, of course, it was a tragedy, but we're going to try to benefit from that tragedy by learning about food poisoning so it doesn't happen again. So let's begin our lesson by listening to the first part of our lesson, and we'll be right back.
Food poisoning symptoms can appear very quickly after someone consumes contaminated food or drink, although in some cases it can take several days for a person to get sick. Symptoms of food poisoning vary, but commonly include vomiting, diarrhea, stomach cramps, and fever. In extreme cases, the liver or kidneys may be affected, which can be fatal. Fortunately, most instances of food poisoning are not too severe and can be treated at home by drinking plenty of water, taking medicine, and resting.
大家好，第一部分介绍名词 symptom， 它的意思是疾病的症状或是征兆。例如 ，If your symptoms include a high fever, cough, and sore throat, then you might have the flu. 如果你的症状包含发高烧、咳嗽和喉咙痛，那你可能得了流感。或者 Severe chest pain is a common symptom of a heart attack. 剧烈胸痛是心脏病发作的常见征兆。接着看到 diarrhea 这个单字，它是名词，表示腹泻。例如 The man was sick with diarrhea after he ate some food that wasn't properly cooked. 这名男子在吃了一些没有煮熟的食物后腹泻了。或是 If you eat a large salad and then drink a glass of milk, you will probably end up with diarrhea. 如果你吃了一大碗沙拉，然后又喝了一杯牛奶，你可能会腹泻。再来看到名词 cramp， 它的意思是痉挛或是抽筋。例如 Stretching before and after workouts is important to avoid muscle cramps. 运动前后伸展是避免肌肉痉挛的重要方式。也可以说 Emily woke up in the middle of the night with a painful cramp in her leg. Emily 因为痛苦的腿部抽筋而半夜醒来。下一个介绍形容词 fatal， 表示致命的或是毁灭性的。我们可以说 In spite of the doctor's best efforts, the patient's injuries proved to be fatal. 尽管医生尽了最大的努力，但病人的伤势最终证明是致命的。又或者说 If dogs eat chocolate, it can be fatal. 如果狗吃了巧克力，可能会致命。
Okay, let's talk about the first part of our lesson for today. It says food poisoning symptoms can appear very quickly after someone consumes contaminated food or drink, although in some cases it can take several days for a person to get sick. So, of course, you want to have some sort of indications or signs of the disease or of the problem, and these are symptoms, okay? So you might want to look for symptoms if you think you have suffered from food poisoning. Some of the symptoms or signs of this disease or indications, they can appear pretty quickly after you eat some contaminated food, okay? So, yes, if you had a dinner perhaps at maybe 5 or 6 o'clock, and then you start feeling uncomfortable at around 8 or 9, well, that's usually what happens. The symptoms will appear rather quickly, but in some cases, of course, they will take much longer to appear. It could take several days for a person to actually get sick.
Absolutely, yeah. Anything from sort of 30 minutes, 45 minutes after you eat to a few hours later to even a few days later. That's really quite surprising that sometimes it can take so long. But I think it's fairly safe to say that if you've ever had food poisoning, you will probably recognize the symptoms similar to maybe having a flu or something, but really much more focused in your stomach area, and you'll certainly be feeling different kinds of discomfort in your stomach. We get a good description here. It says, symptoms of food poisoning vary, so they can be a range of different symptoms. Everyone doesn't react or feel the same way. They can vary, but commonly include vomiting, diarrhea, stomach cramps, and fever. Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, though, vomiting, diarrhea, fever, this can happen in other types of illnesses like a flu or even COVID with some people. The stomach cramps, though, that's the thing I remember from the one time I'm sure I had food poisoning. The cramps are the worst. But vomiting is when you throw up food. You've eaten food, it's in your stomach, you start to feel very sick, like the food is coming back up through your mouth, out the way it came, and that would be vomiting. If you're trying to make yourself sick, if you think you've had something bad to eat, you could make yourself vomit. But of course, usually it's this uncontrollable feeling of sickness. That feeling that you have before, we usually call that nausea, N-A-U-S-E-A, that feeling of I'm going to be sick, and when the food is actually coming out, you are vomiting, or more commonly, we would say throwing up. Diarrhea, liquid poo. Basically, your poo is no longer solid as it should normally be, I guess. It's now very liquid, and it will come out with rather a lot of force, and quite frequently, too. That's another thing that you'll definitely notice. And the cramps that I mentioned, it feels like someone has grabbed your stomach, and they're squeezing it with their fingers, and it's very painful. And they kind of ebb and flow, those cramps. You can get them for really bad for 5 minutes, and then they go away for 10 minutes, and then they come back. And all the time you feel sick with the vomiting and the nausea, you're running to the bathroom with the diarrhea, the stomach cramps are causing you problems all the time, and you may even have a high temperature or a fever. But in most of those cases, you'll probably stay home, right? You might eat some very gentle stuff, maybe just sip some water, but it can get much worse where you do need professional medical help.
Now, in extreme cases, the liver or kidneys may be affected, which can be fatal. So these are extreme cases. It probably won't happen too often, but these are more serious cases that could happen. You could have some organ damage. Your kidneys and your liver are organs in your body, along with the heart and the stomach, and these organs could be affected, and they could be fatal, actually. If something's fatal, it causes death.
So you could actually die, of course, because the liver and kidneys are largely responsible for cleaning your body of impurities and fighting off nasty things like toxins that might come into your food. Fortunately, the good news is most instances or most events of food poisoning are not too severe and can be treated at home by drinking plenty of water, taking medicine, and resting. Yeah, most people will probably not have to go to a hospital or anything like that. They're not too severe, not too serious. You can treat it at home. You can take care of yourself. Be your own nurse and doctor at home, maybe with the help of your loved ones or roommates. You drink plenty of water. Just sip that water. Take some medicine, maybe some pain medicine or something to help you sleep, and rest. And it will just be a matter of time for your body to do what it does and take care of you, and you'll feel better eventually, but it may take a few days or even longer. All right, let's turn our attention to the second part of our article. Listen to it first and come back to chat about it.
When it comes to food poisoning, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Although it's difficult to avoid food poisoning altogether, good hygiene and food safety can go a long way toward keeping you safe. Experts recommend washing your hands and cooking surfaces often, keeping raw and cooked foods separate to avoid cross-contamination, and cooking foods thoroughly to kill harmful bacteria. Furthermore, it's important to store foods properly and to throw out food that's gone bad.
第二部分看到名词 prevention， 它的意思是预防、阻止或是妨碍。例如 The organization created an advertisement to promote the prevention of forest fires. 这个组织制作了一支广告来提倡预防森林火灾。又或者说 People from our neighborhood had a meeting to talk about crime prevention. 住在邻近地区的人开会讨论预防犯罪的问题。再来我们看到 hygiene 这个单字，它是名词，指的是卫生或是卫生情况。举例来说 Doctors say that poor hygiene is at the root of the problem. 医生说卫生条件不佳是这个问题的原因。又或者说 Children need to be taught the importance of good hygiene at an early age. 在小孩还小时，有必要教导他们好的卫生习惯是很重要。最后看到副词 thoroughly， 它表示彻底的或是仔细的。我们可以说 Miriam wanted to thoroughly discuss the treatment options with her dentist. Miriam 想与她的牙医彻底的讨论治疗方案。也可以说 Clean the wound thoroughly before you put the bandage on. 在包扎绷带之前，需仔细的清洁伤口。
Okay, let's chat about the second part of our lesson for today. It says, when it comes to food poisoning, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So here we have the phrase, when it comes to something. In other words, when we're talking about something or when we're referring to something specifically, if we're talking about food poisoning, well, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. As you know, in the English measuring system, we've got pounds and we've got ounces. An ounce is a smaller part of a pound. So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In other words, if you focus on prevention, then you don't really need to worry about the cure later because the cure would be much more difficult to have. And we just want to stop the disease from happening in the first place. Like with smoking, okay? If you don't start smoking, then you won't get lung cancer and you won't have to have surgery later on in life. So this, again, is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And prevention is when you stop something from happening in the first place. The verb is to prevent.
Exactly, to prevent. And what you're doing, those acts you're taking or those things you're doing is the prevention to avoid that trouble. Although it's difficult to avoid food poisoning altogether, good hygiene and food safety can go a long way toward keeping you safe. So it is difficult to avoid food poisoning altogether. I suppose if you prepared all your own food at home, never ate out anywhere, that would be one thing. But even then, some of the food can arrive from the supermarket, be in your fridge. It can still be infected or nasty with nasty bacteria and stuff. It could still make you sick. So it's probably one of those things that will maybe happen at least once or twice in your life, especially if you're eating out at restaurants and takeaway places. But good hygiene and food safety can go a long way toward keeping you safe. This is our ounce of prevention. As long as you remember to do the smart and safe things, then you will be able to avoid most cases of food poisoning. And hygiene is key. Hygiene is just being clean. Being clean in a kind of scientific way, knowing about bacteria and viruses, knowing about soaps and sprays and alcohol, things like that, knowing to keep your kitchen clean and your work surfaces clean, knowing to wash dishes with hot water and soap instead of just sort of rinsing them under the tap. So hygiene is just thinking about cleanliness and health safety in a very kind of scientific way. So good hygiene and food safety and awareness of how to treat food well and keep it safe and keep your kitchen clean, it can go a long way toward keeping you safe. It can do a lot, in other words, towards keeping you safe. So what do the experts recommend? What are some good basic hygiene steps we can take?
Well, here's what experts recommend. They recommend washing your hands and cooking surfaces often, keeping raw and cooked foods separate to avoid cross-contamination, and cooking foods thoroughly to kill harmful bacteria. So basically, experts give us 3 recommendations here. We need to keep things clean. First of all, we need to wash our hands every time we handle food, use soap and water, and we also need to wash those cooking surfaces. Okay, so we might have cutting boards or the sink surface or whatever, and we're going to use those surfaces to prepare our food. They should be washed thoroughly, quite often. We also need to keep raw and cooked foods separate to avoid cross-contamination. So that's the second thing we need to keep in mind. We've got raw food, which is food that is not cooked, like vegetables straight from the farmer's market. So that's raw food or raw vegetables or even raw meat. And then we've got cooked foods, foods that have been cooked. They've been heated either by frying them in the pan or baking them in the oven or whatever. So we've got to keep them separate, keep them apart from each other. And we want to do that to avoid cross-contamination, which means the vegetables might contaminate the meat and the meat might contaminate the vegetables. So yeah, keep those separate from each other. And then the third thing they recommend is to cook those foods thoroughly to kill harmful bacteria. So if you cook something thoroughly, you cook it completely. You don't half-bake the thing. You do it all the way, and you make sure it's thoroughly cooked, fully cooked, so that the bacteria will die.
And especially, this is important, of course, with meat. When you're cooking meat, it needs to be cooked thoroughly all the way through. And of course, different meats require temperatures that are different. I guess I cook chicken the most, so I do know that the internal or the inside temperature of your chicken should be above 75 degrees Celsius. That's what they say.
Okay.
So as long as you're cooking your chicken, make sure that the inside temperature gets up to 75 or higher, and then it should be safe. I think beef is a little bit lower, and of course with beef we can have medium or medium rare or well done. But it is important to look those up, and of course you can find all the right numbers very easily on the internet. Furthermore, it's important to store foods properly and to throw out food that's gone bad. Yeah, a lot of people like to have leftovers or, takeaway stuff. We get a doggy bag at that restaurant for all that delicious food you didn't have the time or space to finish. But when you're storing the food, this is after you've prepared the food, when you're keeping the food, putting it back in the fridge, you need to do things quite carefully. Don't leave the food out on the countertop for hours and hours before you put it into the fridge. And of course, make sure the things in the fridge are sealed properly so air doesn't get to them. And also be aware of how long things have been in the fridge. If something's been in there for more than a few days or a week, depending on the food, you need to know exactly what's going on. And your nose and eyes are always a good judge as well. If it smells bad or if it looks wrong, then that can definitely tell you that this food is not safe to eat. So yes, throw out all of the food that's gone bad, that is no longer safe to eat.
And of course, we have to believe that restaurants are following these guidelines. Maybe sometimes they aren't. And therefore, if we go to the restaurant to eat their food, we might get sick. So keep that in mind. Okay,
Yeah.
It's time now to move on to the third and final paragraph for today. We will listen to it first.
By understanding the causes, symptoms, and ways to treat and prevent food poisoning, you can help protect yourself and your loved ones from this unpleasant experience. After all, food should be enjoyed, not feared.
Okay, so here we are with a little paragraph to kind of wrap up our article of 2 days all about food poisoning. It says, by understanding the causes, symptoms, and ways to treat and prevent food poisoning, you can help protect yourself and your loved ones from this unpleasant experience. Absolutely. And that's basically what we've been talking about. And the article has been explaining over the last couple of days the causes, what causes, where food poisoning comes from, why food poisoning happens. A symptom is basically a sign of a disease, right? So when you're talking about, I have a sore throat, I have a cough, I have this weird red mark on my arm that's very itchy, these are symptoms. That's the sign. And then, of course, the doctor will be able to tell you what the disease is. That will be the diagnosis. But nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, stomach cramps, these are the typical symptoms or signs of food poisoning. So we know about that. Ways to treat food poisoning if you do get sick, right? Stay home, sip water, go to the hospital if the food poisoning gets worse or symptoms get worse or persist for too long. And the best way, as we mentioned, is to prevent food poisoning. Stop it from happening in the first place. Keep your food nice and clean and safe, healthy and delicious. And you can help protect yourself and your loved ones from this unpleasant experience. I think it's happened to me twice in my life, and it's not an experience I would want to revisit anytime soon.
I don't think I've ever had this problem before. I have had diarrhea before from eating something. So maybe that is a type of food poisoning.
Could have been mild.
But maybe mild. It was over pretty quickly. Yeah. But again, usually what you're supposed to do is just get some rest and drink plenty of water. But you also might want to talk to your doctor for some more specific ways to treat your problem. So yes, if you understand these things, then you should be able to protect both yourself and your loved ones, your family members, and you should be able to avoid this experience, or at least lessen its severity. After all, food should be enjoyed, not feared. So here, after all, in the end, we need to be reminded of this. Food is supposed to be there for us to enjoy and not to fear it. I suppose if we did fear food, we might actually lose weight that way, but that's probably not the right way to go about that. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Here comes Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分有一句提到 Experts recommend washing your hands and cooking surfaces often. 专家建议经常清洗双手和厨房流理台表面。那这边我们来整理一下动词 recommend 的用法。Recommend 它有推荐或是建议的意思。那来看第一种用法，我们可以用 recommend 加上名词或动名词去表达推荐某事物，那么后面可以接 to somebody 表达推荐某事物给某人。例如 She recommended this book to me. 她推荐这本书给我。那特别注意，虽然中文会说她推荐我这本书，可是英文不能说成 She recommended me this book， 这样的用法就不正确咯。第二个，我们可以用到 recommend 加上名词或动名词来表达建议做某事，像是 I recommend getting to the airport by taxi. 我建议你搭计程车去机场。第三个用法是用 recommend that主词加上 should 再加原形动词，或者是 recommend that 主词加上原形动词，这是表达建议某人做某事，其中的 that 可以省略不用。例如 He recommended that we should get to the movie theater early. 或者是 He recommended that we get to the movie theater early. 他建议我们提早到电影院。那补充一下，还有一些动词也适用这样的句型，像是 advise, propose, suggest 表示建议， ask, request, require, demand 表示要求，还有 command, order 表示命令。这些动词它们后面同样都可以接 that 主词加上 should 再加原形动词，或者是接 that 主词加上原形动词。好，那么课文第三部分，它第一句写到说，透过了解食物中毒的原因、症状以及治疗和预防方法，你可以帮助保护自己和所爱的人免于这种不愉快的经历。文中是用 protect yourself and your loved ones from this unpleasant experience 来表达保护自己和所爱的人免于这种不愉快的经历。好，那当我们用到 protect加受词 from 再加上名词或动名词，这可以表达保护点点点免于什么，保护什么什么不受什么的伤害。像 She wore sunglasses to protect her eyes from the sun， 意思就是她戴墨镜来保护眼睛不受阳光伤害。那我们也补充一下，也可以用到 prevent、keep 或是 stop 加上受词加上 from 再加动词 ing， 那这样的句型则可以表达避免阻止某人做某事，或者是避免某事发生。那我们造两个例句。Don't let fear prevent you from chasing your dreams. 别让恐惧阻止你追求梦想。She waters her plants every day to keep them from drying out. 她每天替植物浇水，以防它们干透。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Symptom. A cough is often a symptom of the flu.Vomit. The dog vomited after eating something from the garbage. Fatal. There was a fatal car accident on the highway today. Prevention. For the prevention of heart disease, it's a good idea to exercise regularly. Thoroughly. Ron made sure that he washed the dishes thoroughly before drying them.
Discussion Starter starts now!
It's time now for our discussion starter, and the question is, have you ever experienced food poisoning? If yes, what happened? And if no, how do you think you've managed to avoid it?
I had food poisoning when I ate at a teppanyaki restaurant in a night market here in Taipei. My symptoms included stomach cramps, vomiting, all the typical ones we mentioned there. I didn't have a fever, though, so that was nice. It was a busy Saturday. It was one of those places where they cook the food in front of you. I think maybe the chef was just under pressure to get the food prepared because there was a line of people. We'd already waited like 20 minutes to get a seat, and I believe it might have been the chicken, in fact, that they served. It might have just been on the grill not quite long enough. Didn't reach that 75 degrees, so I felt bad for a couple of days. But that's what happens when you live in the big city, as they say.
You probably should let them know that happened so they won't do that in the future. But for me, I've never really had food poisoning before because I think the reason for that is just that I've been lucky. Okay, I just haven't had the opportunity to be sick from food. Hopefully it won't happen to me anytime soon.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.